What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Understable Discourse. Hopefully, by now, your go-to place for all the disc golf statistics and analysis for the Pro Tour. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about a few things, mostly the President Cup, the Champions Cup, and we're going to be looking at our daily fantasy sports picks for the week. I don't have the longest episode for you here. We're really going to be focusing and honing in on the Champions Cup itself. But next week, we're going to take a look back at the first major, and we're going to take a look at, everything we've seen this season up to this major, and some highlights, and just what we should be looking for going into the rest of the season. But let's get into it. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to look at the course itself, because if we're going to be talking about the President's Cup, we're going to be talking about the Champions Cup, and all this, really, it's all revolving around the course. So we're gonna get a better understanding of what the course looks like, what they're playing on, all that kind of stuff. Home to the 2024 OTB Open and other events, Swenson Park in Stockton, California, was the winner of the bid to host this year's Champions Cup, and it was given to Sean Jack and Sean Mercy, both whom were assistant TDs for the World Championships at Smuggler's Notch. So these guys know what they're doing when it comes to building events. They've dealt with big events in the past, so the event is in good hands. And sitting at over 11,000 feet, Swenson Park is a very, very long course filled with water carries, tight OB, and demanding gaps and mandatories. But we're going to address the elephant in the room here, which is the Champions Cup was originally designed to be held at W.R. Jackson and celebrate the difficulty of woods golf. Now, I know that no one has ever, we don't come out outright and say this has to be a wooded major. I don't believe anyone's, from the actual PDGA has said this has to be a wooded major, but the vibe that we've been given, the general thoughts and opinions around this event are that it's supposed to be a difficult wooded major of some kind to challenge a specific style of play. And that's what this is for, especially as we continue, in disc golf to kind of look at the format that professional golf has used with majors that challenge specific types of skill sets and whatnot. So, yeah, this is not the wooded course that most of us would expect to see. But after Beatles destroyed the W.R. Jackson, it was moved to other wooded courses. And the obvious goal, like I said, was to keep it difficult and keep it wooded. And that was made extremely obvious with it being held at Northwood Black last year, arguably one of, if not the hardest wooded course that we have or the pros have ever played. And so when it was announced that it was coming to California, specifically at a golf course, it seemed really odd, and a lot of people weren't very happy about that, offering up other courses that the event should be at. For me personally, I wasn't super thrilled to hear it was happening here. I don't always find Swenson Park to be the most exciting. I'm excited to see the changes they've made this year. I think it's going to make the event much more watchable and entertaining. But personally, I'd love to see a Champions Cup navigate itself over to Iron Hill or somewhere a little bit closer to my backyard. But obviously, this is not the wooded course that we thought. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into the idea or concept that majors should have their own identities. I think it's evident that tournament directors understand that going to Swenson this year is kind of a band-aid solution. I mean, that's what Sean mentioned when he was interviewed this week, is that he knows that this is not some kind of long-term play to bring the Champions Cup to California every single year, and that this is more of a, hey, we have a great course, we have a great opportunity here, we can fill a need for getting a tough event out, let us take a crack at it, and that's why we're here. And, the Champions Cup, I think, is a very, very young major, and we still have to kind of carve out what its identity over the next several years is going to look like. We know that it's coming to Lynchburg in 2026, and maybe having this year and next year kind of spoken for, that by 2027 that the IDGC will be back up and running again. We'll have ourselves a brand new, it will never be the OG W.R. Jackson. Maybe we'll have kind of a new W.R. Jackson at that point, and we'll have some more to kind of go off of. But enough about that. Let's look at the actual course itself. When it comes to design, Swenson Park was designed by Leonard, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name, Moyse. MUISC, however you want to pronounce that out there. You know that I like to really take care to pronounce names as correctly as possible because that's an important thing to me. But he designed the course, and originally it consisted of 18 holes for the OTB Open that we've seen in the past. But one of the things they really tried to do this year to challenge the field was they added 10 additional alternate hole designs because they kind of wanted to make like 27 or more unique holes that each division would have to prepare for. And split into two different layouts. The course is going to be played in the A layout on Thursday and Friday, and the B layout on Saturday and Sunday. And so the layouts are pretty similar in terms of their distance and their par, but they're very unique in the way that they're played. Layout A for the FPO is just over 9,000 feet with a par of 67, and layout B is 9,200 feet with a par of 67. So not much of a big difference there. On the MPO side, you're looking at layout A with 11,000 feet and a par of 65, and layout B is also just over 11,000 feet with a par of 66. So the layouts from layout to layout are looking pretty similar in terms of distance and par, but what you're going to see is some fluctuation of some holes that played as a par 3 in round 1 and 2 will play as a par 4 in round 3 and 4, and vice versa, which I think makes things kind of interesting. It's tough from a viewer's perspective because I think it really leans on the commentary team to have to be able to give us really good descriptors of where we're at in the course, what we're playing to, why that landing zone is important. And between you, me, and the lamppost outside, I don't think our commentators are really great at this yet. And I've seen if the commentators for the President's Cup are any indication of who we're getting for the actual event, I'm not super amped up that we're going to have that top tier level commentary. I hope that going into this, a lot of notes were taken about the course, and they're going to be able to convey to everyone out there watching the importance of where the disc is at. But that remains to be seen. I hope they do it. But it's just not something we've seen from the group so far. So that could be a bit of a miss on this. And I know that some of the pros have kind of mentioned that in their discussion of the course. That is a concern, that it will be confusing to viewers. So hopefully we're able to really convey what the course is going to look like and make it more fun and entertaining for everybody who's watching. Some significant work has been put into the course in order to improve it from last year, including things like more than a dozen trees have been planted to create additional gaps and obstacles in decision making. They also built a $20,000 tee area, according to TD Sean, to hole 1 to elevate the tee pad. There's a stage now. There's a 2-tiered VIP seating with couches and tents and high top tables, and it looks really awesome. A place for players and caddies. And I believe people who purchase like the gold VIP tickets can sit there. It's going to be really unique, and it's going to add a lot of flair and drama to the event. And looking at what we've seen so far with it on the President's Cup today, and the images that Sean displayed, it looks pretty cool. Worth $20,000? I don't know. That also remains to be seen. But then they also did some hole reordering to give us a better hole 1 and a significantly better finishing hole by using hole 17 from last year as the new hole 18 from this year. So one of the things that I like to do is kind of compare courses. The problem is looking at last year's design doesn't really compare the best to this year's design with the way things have been restructured and all the layouts. And so it won't be very helpful, I think, to do a direct one-to-one comparison of the changes and the differences. So instead, we're going to kind of just look at some of the really potential consequential holes, discuss what the course requires in general, and take kind of an overview of the course, from a very high level, maybe 10,000 foot perspective. When you look at Swenson Park, I think the first thing we all think of is you've got to have powerful tee shots. Yes, we are on a golf course. Yes, that implies that the bombers are going to reign supreme. And, a lot of ground is covered on this course. Being able to leverage your distance and your accuracy has always been a staple at the OTB Open. But it has other things, too. It's got some forced water carries that can add a lot of difficulty in decision making and require that combination of both distance and accuracy, like I mentioned. There's also a handful of really difficult mandatory placements, low ceilings, and tight OB lines that are there this year that I think require top tier shot shaping. So not only is it, how far can you throw, how accurate can you throw, it's also about the shape of the shot while it's in the air to match the undulation of the ground, to match the low ceiling that you're presented with. I think it's going to require the skill set that we need. And even though Swenson isn't a wooded disc golf course, the sentiment that Champions Cup should be a difficult course, I think it still kind of holds water here, but only time is going to tell as we look at the scores that happen throughout the weekend. Looking at hole 1, I think you see your first really great example of what the differences they're going to have in for the two different layouts. While they do use kind of alt pin and alt tee pads in certain areas of this course, some of the holes like hole 1 are going to be completely different from round to round, from the A layout to the B layout. And in rounds 1 and 2, they're going to be playing the A layout, which makes it a par 4, sitting at 554 feet for the FPO and 688 feet for the MPO, which is kind of interesting because it seems like the best place to land is kind of past the basket areas for the B layout. So you're not really, it's not as if you're playing to the B layout basket and that's a good enough shot. It is a bit of a different shot shape. It is a different landing zone. So there's more that you have to learn as a player. But like I said, in rounds 3 and 4, they're going to be using the B layout, dropping it to a par 3 and the distances to a 311-foot hole for FPO and a 378-foot hole for the MPO field. And this is a prime example, and you're going to see this kind of come up, is we're going to know how well pros practice the course. We're going to see what they were able to do and put in ahead of time to get prepared for an event like this. Hole 5 is a hole we got to talk about here. It is hole 4 from last year's OTB Open, and it definitely proved to be one of the more consequential holes for both the MPO and the FPO division. While it wasn't technically the most difficult hole for the MPO field, it was a very early round bonus birdie. Only 20% of the field was able to pick up the birdie last year, with another 20% getting bogey or worse. And on the FPO side, this hole was straight up one of the toughest holes they had to play, being the actual toughest hole on their first round last year, averaging 0.57 strokes over par. Now, what makes hole 5 difficult is that it requires a combination of consistent power with shot shaping, something you're going to see consistently happening over the whole track of this course. But competitors are going to have solid tee shots that set themselves up to take big distance, a bite out of the big distance on shot number 2. And so that the placement of where your second shot is at is very, very crucial, because it does have a well-guarded green. And I think one of the reasons that I have this hole as like a hole to watch is because hole 5 is not going to be the hole that wins you the tournament or loses you the tournament. But what it can do is it can provide a momentum killer coming off of the first few holes of the round, or it can be a hole where you can start the momentum going into the second half of the front 9. Hole 10 might be one of my favorites on this course. I think if you are asking what a great description of what makes a really, really solid professional tournament level hole, look no further than hole 10. This is the old hole 9 from last year, which was another one of the most difficult holes for the FPO field, at averaging nearly half a stroke over par. What makes this hole really great are two very distinct features. The first is that there is an immediate decision that you're given off the tee pad. Since there's a portion of OB that kind of juts out into the fairway, you have to make a decision to either throw safer and shorter, covering less OB airspace, but making sure you're in the fairway, but now you're set pretty far back for your second shot, or you can try to go big, bring a little bit more OB into play, but give yourself the much easier look into the green, which brings up the second part of the hole that makes it more interesting, is that there is a forced water carry on your second shot or your third shot, depending on how far back you are and if you lay up. So depending on where you put yourself after your tee shot decision, you now have to make a secondary decision of if you're going to carry the water or not. So I like this hole because it presents the players with a very simple, straightforward structure and says, you decide how you want to play this. We're not telling you that you have to land here, 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 or here. You can land in any of those places and you can make it work. But depending on what you choose and where you land will determine how difficult the rest of the hole is. And they completely let it up to the players and how that's going to be. So I love the way the hole's designed. I'd love to see more holes like this on courses. And I think hole 10 is just going to be a great hole. I'm expecting a lot of scoring separation as players kind of make that turn into the back half of the course. Now, for me personally, I think so much of a tournament comes down to the last hole of the round. It needs to be a hole that's got a combination of like consequences, pressure, intensity, and you've got to go out with some kind of bang that makes players always have in the back of their mind, yes, I may be here, yes, I may have a 2-stroke lead, but hole 18. And so looking at last year's layout, hole 18 just wasn't doing it. It just wasn't the right hole. Hole 17 was the right hole. So now old hole 17 has become the new hole 18, which fits the major vibe much better. The green of 18 now is dangerous with tight OB on both sides, with water coming very, very close on the right side of the basket, and a tricky approach depending on where your tee shot lands. Once again, the more you bite off on your tee shot, the easier your shot into the green is going to become. But if you get too aggressive and you mess up your tee shot, you are making a very, very difficult second shot for yourself. And one of the things that you got to remember about this hole is that in past years, we very, very typically see a lot of players at that 40 to 50 foot mark when it comes to their putts. And a lot of players laying up, or they go for it and they're in the water. And with this being the final hole, those putts become incredibly consequential and put so much pressure on the players to make decisions on how they want to end their rounds. And I could just see the entire major coming down to the final stretch of the course, hole 18 looming in their heads. And you know, who's to say that you get one player who has a great tee shot, the next player steps up, throws it a little bit further, and now they get the advantage of seeing where the other player lands on their second shot. It's just, I think it's set up really, really well for drama. So that's kind of an overview of the course. We're going to look at the President's Cup now, which actually is kind of interesting because it's a little bit late, because you could be watching the President's Cup as we speak. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into all of it because it's going on right now. We'll take a brief look at the teams. I have some thoughts that I want to share about it. You know, Team USA doesn't really have any real surprises. It contains all the top names that you would expect. Really would have loved to see Ezra Robinson picked to be on the team, because the video that he made to try to get on the team was probably one of the best videos I've ever seen a disc golfer make for any kind of like social media content. If you haven't seen it, go back and look. It's pretty incredible. He ended up being like an alternate for the team. But Team USA looks very, very typical. Now, Team Europe is interesting. It looks very strong with headliners like Kristen and Evelina, Niklas and Simon. But that point right there is kind of where it starts to drop off. You've got Vino, who I think is very capable of playing with the best of the best when he's at the very top of his game. But he still doesn't match up well with a lot of the lower reserves on Team USA. And then you've got Jakub, Albert Tom, and Una Heinonen, who are all really solid players in their own right, but compared across the line to players like Isaac Robinson, Anthony Barella, and Paul Macbeth, there's just a large gap here from what I can tell. And speaking of what I can tell that this European team was selected with a bit of 2024 bias, because some of the guys on this list, they haven't been playing as well this year as they normally have. And I'm really surprised to see if we're putting the best foot forward here as a team, for Team Europe. I'm surprised that Jesse Nieminen isn't on the main team, and to see that Silva is not the alternate over someone like Henna is a bit surprising to me. Now, they're starting out by playing a 9-hole round on holes 1, 8 through 13, 17, and 18. This first round has standard scoring where each group of 4 is going to get 4 points for whoever is the best score, 2 points for the second best, 1 point for the third best, and 0 points for whoever gets the worst score on that card of 4 people. Ties end up splitting the points. And the second round is individual matchups where the winners get 3 points, ties get 1.5 points, and losers get nothing. Now, it's already going on, like I said. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the original stroke play round is already over and they're moving on to the matchups. I won't tell you where they're at right now, because if you do want to go watch it, I think you should do that. It's really great. It's a fun event that I'd love to see grow over time. I think there's a lot of opportunity with the President's Cup. If we can put a little more time into it, I'd love to see it be its own like event weekend as opposed to just a one-day thing like this. So go check it out if you haven't already. When it comes to how I think they're going to perform, personally, I don't see the US losing their undefeated streak. I think there's going to be some surprises on how things go, and I'm willing to bet the scoring round is a lot closer than people think it's going to be. But the US is probably going to take most of the individual matchups. But we'll see. You never know. Obviously, I live in the United States, so rooting for Team USA seems pretty standard, but I've always been a humongous advocate for European disc golf. I would love to see them be super competitive here. I think they definitely can be. And, we'll see what happens. Now, moving over to the Champions Cup, which, it's a lot. The President's Cup, the Champions Cup. There's a lot of cups being passed around. But with the weather looking really, really great and the entire field basically being present, there are just so many possible storylines, for the major this weekend. Is Kristen going to be able to take down her 8th career major, surpassing Des Redding, Elaine King, and Katrina Allen? That's a pretty big thing. She's never been to Swenson Park before. In fact, I think she said this is the first time she's ever actually been to California, but she's still the clear favorite to win this weekend by most people's standards. Another big storyline is, can Gannon Buhr win his first ever Champions Cup and punch another hole in his major scorecard? One of the other, and I would say more interesting storylines that continues to grow every single year is, will Ricky Wysocki or Calvin Heimberg end their just agonizing major droughts? Ricky has been chasing something since 2017, and I feel like he gets close sometimes, but, he just can't seem to get, over the finish line. And Calvin has never lifted the major trophy over his head. So statistically, Calvin is pretty dominant at the OTB Open. This could be his year. This could be Ricky's year. But we'll see what it all shakes out. Looking at some of my predictions for the event, coming in 3rd place for FPO, I think that we're kind of looking at a very chalky weekend when it comes to what we can expect. I don't feel like there's going to be many surprises in the FPO division based on consistency, distance capability, and putting a little bit. I'm going to slot Ella Hansen into 3rd place here. I really wanted to put Evelina Salonen because this is a thrower's course, and Evelina is an incredible thrower of the disc. But over the course of 4 rounds, I'm going to pick Ella Hansen's putt over Evelina's putt. And so that's why I've got Ella here in 3rd place. I'll talk about 1st and 2nd place at the same time because let's be honest, this whole thing is going to be a Kristen versus Holland battle. I don't expect anyone else fighting at the top with those two. I think they're going to clear and head themselves away from the field by a few strokes. And, this year, Holland hasn't missed the podium in 5 straight events, and she's won 2 of the last 3. Kristen has only played in 3 events, but she's won 2 of those events, and she's never finished worse than 2nd this year. Holland is currently the 2nd best in the world in 6 different major stat categories, but Kristen is number 1 in the world in 6 major stat categories. As much as I would love to see Holland get the upset, I think she takes 2nd, and I've got Kristen winning this one. But honestly, I could see Holland doing it, and that would be fun to watch. And I hope it comes down to the last hole, hole 18, just like we talked about earlier. Now, jumping over to my MPO side of the course predictions, Swenson is infamous for shaking up the field in a dramatic fashion and having some, I would say, less than expected top finishers. So trying to predict a top 3 just is not an easy thing to do. But for me, coming in 3rd place, he has no podiums yet this year, but nobody plays Swenson Park as well as he does. I've got Calvin Heimberg coming in 3rd. He is one of the best ever our sport has ever seen at throwing hard, low ceiling shots. And I'm predicting his first podium of the year, and not a terrible chance that he could also take the event down. I would love to see Calvin break his streak at one of the most comfortable courses he has in his arsenal here at Swenson Park. He just has to avoid that very, very signature Calvin one bad round. For 2nd place, I'm kind of looking once again at the long distance club. I know it's not all distance all the time, but I see a man right now who is on a little bit of a cold streak. Since the Supreme Flight Open, he had a big win off the tour a few weeks ago, and I think this is the best weather he's gotten to play in for weeks, maybe even months. So I'm giving 2nd place and, maybe even fighting for 1st to Anthony Barella. I think this is the week he puts it together. I think we're going to see a really, really competitive Anthony on the course out there. He's been licking his chops to throw the disc big, and this is going to be his chance to do so. For me, coming in 1st place, he's been warming up all season long, which is really, really interesting considering his last name doesn't suggest that. You got 12th, 5th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st at the KC Wide Open a few weekends ago. I think Gannonburg takes down his first ever Champions Cup. Until he gives me a reason to, I don't know how I can take him out of this spot. It feels like his game is firing at all cylinders right now, and he's hitting his stride at the perfect time. And we know how good he is in 4-round events. For me personally, I think there are 5 or 6 players who could win the event this weekend, but Gannon has the biggest piece of the confidence pie that I'm serving up. Speaking of confidence, let's shift over to the daily fantasy pick stuff, because there are no betting lines for the event this week. There are a few reasons for that, and there are some suggestions that maybe betting might be done in disc golf. We'll see. That's not fully confirmed yet, and we'll take a look at it. I know the Pro Tour's website says it'll be back later this year for a different event, but I've heard some sources suggest that betting could be done. But we'll talk more about that as we know more. But one thing that's not done is the daily fantasy picks. And as I've mentioned before, I like to do these through the hold my bag format. So we're going to walk through the picks I have for the week. They do have a free entry option with incredible prizes that you get from OTB. So if you're not logging in each weekend and making your free picks, I don't really know what you're doing, because it's free, it's easy, it's a lot of fun to see how you compare to other people, and it takes like 20 seconds to make your picks. It's super duper easy. In fact, speaking of success, for the Kansas City Wide Open, I finished 5th out of 2,910 people. Tied for 5th technically, but I did win a little bit of gift card money that I have to figure out what I'm going to spend it on. Maybe we'll have a little competition. If you can beat me, maybe I'll spend that money on buying you a disc. Who knows? But there are so far like 3,800 or more people who've already signed up for this weekend on Hold My Bag, and we're going to try to keep the hot streak going. So I'm going to throw my picks up on the screen here, and we'll talk about them. Tier 1, I think we can all understand, Gannonburg. Yeah, right now 48.4% of all participants in Hold My Bag this week have chosen Gannon for Tier 1. I'm not surprised. They're not surprised. Hopefully you're not surprised. Gannon's going to take this thing down, or at least die trying. Tier 2, there's some definite options there of who you can pick. There's some players that I'm snubbing a little bit, and I totally understand that. And I'm being a little risky here by selecting Gavin Rathbun. It's kind of a hot hand approach. He played extremely well at the Kansas City Wide Open and at the Masters Invitational, and he finished 2nd at OTB last year. I don't think it's a crazy pick, because obviously 14.2% of participants agree with me this week. But I got Gavin Rathbun topping out Tier 2, and I could see him playing very well this week. He could also tank and make me eat my words, and that's totally fine. But I've got confidence in you, Gavin. If you're watching out there, parking lot special, baby. Looking at Tier 3, lefty all day long. Austin Turner, I think, has had a really solid season up to this point, has dropped some really great finishes, and there's a premium at this course on righty forehand shots. And I understand all of my lefty friends, you're yelling that the lefty backhand is not the same thing as the righty forehand, but it's close enough of an angle match that I think he's going to have a bit of an advantage on certain holes. Plus, we know that Austin has a cannon for an arm. He just bombs out there. And 15.8% of participants agree with me. So I've got Austin Turner coming in for Tier 3. Tier 4 was probably one of the easiest picks for me. Looking down the list, one name popped out. Nobody else even came close for it. It's Sullivan Tipton. He's had a very strong year this year. He's sitting at 16th place overall on the tour right now with solid performances. He's done very well at the OTB Open before, and being a forehand course, Sullivan's forehands, they're pretty juicy. So it's kind of hard to ignore that, but all that is clearly obvious to other people, because 22.5% of participants agree with me. That's like almost 1,000 people agree that Sullivan Tipton is the best player in Tier 4. Obviously, Tier 5 is the hardest tier of all of them to pick, because there's so many options and so many players to choose from. Swenson Park shakes it up every year and tosses people out like they're dice. You just don't know what you're going to get. And so looking down the list, a few names popped out at me, but I settled on Zachary Nash because he's been performing decently so far this year. He just took down a big win at the Glassblown Open over at Champions Landing. And while, yes, the whole field wasn't there, he did beat some pretty decently talented individuals to take down that win. That's a big course, super open, very bomberish. So I think that's definitely in his advantage. Speaking of which, the dude throws like over 1700 RPMs on a disc, which is incredibly unheard of. I think he holds the record for the tech disc in terms of backhand RPMs, and he finished top 10 at OTB Open last year. So I think all those together, definitely a good solid pick for tier 5. 8.9% of participants are with me on this pick for tier 5. But, given all that, we'll see how we do this week. Are you playing Hold My Bag? If so, let me know. We can go head to head with one another. And like I said before, if we get enough people who are showing that they're playing, maybe we'll make a little Understable Discourse league on Hold My Bag. And we'll have maybe an end-of-year prize for whoever takes down the crown amongst our group. But put your picks that you would make in the comments down below. I'm very curious who you're picking for Hold My Bag if you're playing, or just in general, who you're picking to win the event overall. But hey, that does it for this episode of Understable Discourse. Like I said, I promised you a bit of a quick one. I'm not keeping you around for a full hour this time. But if you like what you see, you like what you hear, please subscribe for weekly content with even more content to come very soon. I'm getting ready to start up some YouTube shorts and do a lot more things with our Instagram and our Facebook. There's going to be a lot of fun things coming out soon, so please make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to like the video. Let me know in the comments what you think and who you have winning this weekend for the MPO and the FPO. Do you have Gannon? Do you have Kristen taking it down? Or is there somebody else that lights up your eye and says they're going to be the ones who end up winning and taking down a major? Maybe we'll have some first-time major winners this weekend. That would be a lot of fun to watch. But until next time, have a great rest of your week and go watch the Champions Cup. This is Understable Discourse, out.